stench hit first, hot, metallic, and thick like the air had been boiled in blood. Roshan stumbled forward, his wrists cuffed, the rough shove of a clawed hand sending him into the glare of the alien marketplace. Voices rose in dozens of dialects he didn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable. Bidding, haggling, the business of selling lives. Above, rusted iron frames groaned under hanging cages, each one holding something that moved, whimpered, or stared with hollow eyes. Roshan kept his gaze low. A human who looked too long at a buyer didn't live long after. He focused on the dirt beneath his feet, and it cracked and stained with things he didn't want to name. Then fingers. Not human fingers, but long and trembling, brushed his arm. He flinched, turning just enough to see her. She stood half hidden in the shadows of a steel enclosure, pale skin with an iridescent shimmer that caught the dim light, silver eyes wide and unblinking. A thin collar of black metal dug into her neck, the same as his. Her lips parted. The words that came out were low, shaking, urgent. Sold for meat. Human. Hold me. Use me. Just get me out of here. The world seemed to narrow until there was only that voice, those words. She didn't sound afraid of him. She sounded as afraid of everything else. Before he could speak, a guard barked something sharp, and the woman, Mishi, he would later learn, was yanked back into darkness. The moment broke, swallowed by the roar of the crowd. Roshan's body moved without thought. He took a step toward her, only to feel the cold press of a weapon between his shoulder blades. The guard behind him hissed in a language Roshan couldn't decipher, but the meaning was clear. Move. They pushed him through the market, past cages of his own kind and others he had never seen, scaled, feathered, armored. He forced himself not to look for her again. In places like this, wanting something was dangerous, but his mind refused to let go. The desperation in her whisper clung to him, wrapping tighter with every step. A bell rang somewhere high above, deep and hollow. The crowd's energy shifted, buyers leaning forward, hands heavy with trade tokens. The auction was about to start. Roshan was forced onto a raised platform, a chain hooked to the collar around his neck. A pale beam of light cut through the smoke-filled air, marking him for inspection. The bidding began, not with the words he understood, but with gestures, clicks, and flashes of rare-colored chits. He didn't care who was offering what. His eyes scanned the rows of cages, searching for silver eyes in the shadows. There, 2 stalls down, half covered by a ragged tarp. She stood still, watching him, the collar at her throat pulsing faintly with an alien device's rhythm. Their gazes locked again, and something unspoken passed between them. Not pity, not pleading, a promise. The crowd roared as an unseen buyer made the final bid. A hook jerked Roshan forward, dragging him off the platform toward a holding pen. He stumbled, nearly falling, but didn't break eye contact with her until a wall of metal cut her from view. In that last heartbeat, he made a silent vow. I will find you. I will get you out, even if it killed him. The transport cage was no bigger than a coffin tipped on its side. Roshan sat with his knees drawn up, metal bars digging into his spine, the floor cold enough to seep into bone. Chains rattled with every bump of the vehicle as it lumbered away from the market, the sound mixing with the distant hum of engines. He counted 6 other cages lined up in the dim hold. Some held humans, others didn't. A low growl came from his left, something large shifting in the shadows, its eyes faintly glowing. Roshan didn't look for long. Staring too much in here could get your throat slit before the chains ever came off. Through the thin gap between bars, he caught a flash of pale shimmer. Mishi. She was 2 cages down, her posture rigid, head lowered, arms wrapped tight around herself. Her silver eyes didn't meet his, but her hands trembled just enough for him to notice. The transport jolted, throwing them all against the bars. One of the guards laughed, an ugly guttural sound, and spat something in his alien tongue. Another guard, a thin, sharp-faced thing with skin like stretched parchment, crouched near Roshan's cage. You stare at her? The guard hissed in broken Terran. Fool, her kind is poison. Touching your blood turns black. Roshan said nothing. Words here were currency you couldn't afford to spend. The guard smirked. They will gut her. Sell the pieces. Pay more for her brain than your whole body. His voice held the kind of casual cruelty that came from speaking truth, or what he wanted Roshan to think was truth. Roshan leaned back against the bars, letting the chains bite into his wrists to hide the way his jaw tightened. Lies came easy to slavers. Truth was harder to find, buried under layers of greed and fear. Another bump in the road sent a shudder through the cage. Mishi flinched, small but sharp, like she'd been hit. Roshan's eyes narrowed. That wasn't the flinch of someone afraid of motion. That was someone remembering pain. The parchment-skinned guard noticed his gaze and chuckled. "She is dangerous, human. I saw her bite a man once. Took the flesh clean." Roshan didn't believe him. Mishi didn't look like a predator. She looked like prey that had learned to survive by making herself small. The transport slowed. A clang of heavy doors opening echoed through the hull, and cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of wet stone and rust. They were inside somewhere now. Underground, maybe. The guards began unlocking the cages one by one, dragging prisoners into a dim corridor lined with pipes. Roshan was hauled out by the chain on his collar, the sudden pull nearly wrenching his neck. The corridor was narrow, water dripping from above. Slaves were marched single file, chains clinking in grim rhythm. Roshan kept his eyes forward, but tilted his head just enough to catch sight of Mishi a few steps ahead. One of the bigger guards shoved her forward hard enough to make her stumble. She didn't cry out, didn't look back, just kept walking, her hands still bound, her collar's faint pulse matching the thud of Roshan's heartbeat. The line halted in front of a steel door, and the parchment-skinned guard leaned close to Roshan again, his breath sour. "You think she whispers to you because she likes you?" His thin lips twisted into something between a grin and a sneer. "A number she sees a fool with a beating heart. She will use it until it stops." Roshan stared back, expression flat. "Maybe," he said quietly. "Or maybe she's the only one here who hasn't tried to kill me." The guard's grin faltered for just a second before he shoved Roshan forward. Inside, the air was thicker, the walls covered in strange markings that seemed to writhe when you didn't look at them directly. Prisoners were sorted into small holding pens, 2 or 3 to a space barely big enough to sit. By the time Roshan was shoved into his pen, his shoulders ached from the chains. Across the narrow walkway, he saw Mishi being placed in her own. For a moment, her gaze flicked to his. No words, just a brief, heavy look, like a message passed without sound. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he knew this much. Whatever she was hiding, it wasn't poison. It was something worse. Something worth killing for. The guards moved down the corridor, their voices fading. Roshan shifted to the corner of his cage, eyes locked on Mishi's shadow beyond the bars. In this place, lies could keep you alive, but finding the truth, that could set you free. And Roshan was already planning how to get it from her. The lights in the holding corridor never went fully dark. They hummed overhead, casting a cold, greenish hue over the prisoners. Time blurred in that light. Minutes could have been hours. Hours could have been days. Roshan sat cross-legged in the corner of his pen, his eyes fixed on the guard post at the far end. 2 guards stood there, one half asleep, the other picking at his teeth with a thin metal blade. Mishi was still across from him, her head tilted just enough that he could see her eyes through the tangle of pale hair. She hadn't spoken since the market. Not once. Not even when the parchment-skinned guard had passed by earlier to mutter another string of threats. Roshan knew better than to shout across the corridor. Words traveled here like smoke, lingering, spreading, always finding the wrong ears. If he wanted to talk to her, he'd have to get closer, and there was only one way to make that happen. He shifted, pulling his right hand slightly free of the sleeve of his torn jacket. Hidden inside, wrapped in a strip of cloth, was the smallest piece of contraband he'd managed to keep since capture, a micro-shock circuit from his old repair kit. To most, it was worthless scrap. To a bored guard, it was a rare toy. Roshan stood stretching his arms to draw attention. The blade-picking guard noticed immediately. "What?" The guard barked in the rough dialect of the market. Roshan held up the wrapped scrap. "Trade." The guard's eyes narrowed, but curiosity pulled him forward. He took the cloth, unwrapping it slowly. The metal caught the light, the faint hum of its still active coil making the guard's eyebrows rise. "What do you want?" "Sell change," Roshan said. "Put me with her." He nodded toward Mishi. The guard grinned, showing teeth filed to points. "Dangerous choice, human." "Still my choice," Roshan said. The guard weighed the scrap in his palm, then glanced down the hall toward the half-asleep partner. With a shrug, he unlocked Roshan's pen, the collar chain rattling as he was pulled across the corridor. Mishi's gaze sharpened the moment the door to her pen opened. She pressed herself to the wall as Roshan was shoved inside. The guard locked it again and sauntered away, already toying with the shock circuit like a child with a new trinket. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt heavier than the chains at their wrists. You paid to be here. Mishi's voice was soft, but there was steel under it. I paid to talk, Roshan said. You whispered to me in the market. I want to know why. Her silver eyes narrowed. And if I don't tell you? Yeah, he leaned back against the bars. Then I wasted my last piece of leverage. But something tells me you didn't pick me by accident. Mishi's hands tightened on her knees. Her voice dropped low enough that it would vanish beneath the hum of the lights. They lied to you about me. They said you're poison, Roshan murmured. She gave a humorless smile. Poison? Number useful. Too useful. My kind was hunted for what we can do. Neural resonance. Our minds can interface with alien tech without tools, and we can make it work better, faster. That makes us valuable. Valuable enough to sell? Valuable enough to betray? Her gaze drifted, not meeting his. I came to Earth under promise of sanctuary. Instead, they put me in chains. There are labs, breeding labs, where they force my kind to create more of us for the trade. That's where I'm being sent. Roshan's stomach tightened. And the market? Just a stop on the way. Sometimes they sell us to the highest bidder. Sometimes the bidders are the labs. She finally looked at him, eyes hard now. If you stay near me, they'll put you down before they let you follow. He shook his head slowly. Or I'll get us both out before they can. Mishi almost laughed, but it came out closer to a breath. You don't know how many have tried. They all end up the same, dead or begging for death. Then we'll be different, he said. For the first time her expression softened, just a flicker like she was testing the feel of the trust after years without it. You risked your freedom to share this cell, she said quietly. Why? Roshan thought of the market, the way she'd clung to him, the whisper that had cut through all the noise and fear. He didn't have an answer that made sense, only the truth. Because when you asked me to get you out, it felt like the first thing worth doing since they put me in chains. She studied him for a long, unblinking moment. And then she nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Then we bargained, she said. I'll tell you how to break my collar, but if you free me, we run together, no matter what we face. Roshan extended his shackled hand. She hesitated, then placed hers in his. The cold metal between their wrists clinked like a lock clicking open. For the first time since the market, Roshan allowed himself to think of escape not as a dream, but as a plan. The first warning came as a smell, sharp and acrid, cutting through the damp metallic air of the holding corridor. Burning plastic. Roshan opened his eyes to see the guard post at the end suddenly burst into frantic movement. One of the guards shouted into a comlink, the other drawing a weapon that hummed with lethal energy. Somewhere beyond the walls, the sound of shouting rose, layered over with the thud of something heavy slamming to the ground. Mishi's head snapped toward the noise. Her silver eyes sharpened. It's starting, she whispered. Roshan's pulse kicked up. What's starting? Before she could answer, the far wall shuddered as a muffled blast ripped through the air. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Prisoners in nearby pens erupted into panicked shouts, rattling their chains. Through the chaos, Roshan caught sight of figures moving in the smoke beyond the corridor. Other prisoners, armed with scavenged tools and pipes, cutting through the locks with stolen plasma cutters. A riot. Mishi didn't wait for it to reach them. She leaned close, her voice urgent. The collars, they use a frequency lock. It's tied to the guard post signal. If that goes down, the collars fail. How do we drop the signal? Roshan asked. She nodded toward the guard post where the comlink blinked with warning lights. We destroy that before they kill everyone in here. The first prisoner broke through. An insectoid alien with two of its arms severed, swinging a heavy pipe with the others. Guards fired, the crack of energy bolts echoing. Roshan saw his opening. The guard assigned to their section was backing toward the fight, his keys jingling from his belt. Roshan met Mishi's eyes. She gave the smallest nod. When the guard turned, Roshan lunged, yanking the man backward into the bars. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and Roshan snatched the keys while Mishi's hands flashed forward, quick as a striking snake, to pull the man's sidearm free. In seconds, their cage was open. They moved fast, ducking low through the chaos. The air was hot now, heat from both small fires licking along the walls. Stalls had been overturned, alien food sizzling where it had spilled into flames. Smoke curled through the air, turning the market's alien scents into a choking haze. A scream split the din. A human voice. Roshan almost turned toward it, but Mishi caught his arm. "No stops! You want out? You follow me." They wove through the crowd, dodging both prisoners and guards. A heavy drone dropped from the ceiling, spraying suppressive fire into the masses. Mishi shoved Roshan into the shadow of a collapsed stall just in time to avoid a burning bolt that scorched the ground. When they reached the guard post, 2 slavers were still holding the line. Mishi didn't hesitate. She raised the stolen sidearm and fired. The first guard fell before he knew he was under attack. Roshan slammed into the second, driving him back into the comm console. The device sparked under the impact. Mishi grabbed a piece of metal debris and smashed it into the controls. Sparks exploded in a shower of light. Roshan felt it instantly, his collar released with a faint click, the weight vanishing from his throat. Mishi's fell away a second later, hitting the ground with a dull ring. The fight in the market intensified. As more collars popped open, freed prisoners surged forward with a new kind of fury. The guards, realizing control was slipping, began retreating toward the exits. Mishi grabbed Roshan's hand. "Now we run!" They sprinted through the burning stalls, leaping over broken tables and bodies, some moving, some still. The smoke clawed at Roshan's throat, his lungs burning, but he didn't slow. Ahead, a section of the wall had collapsed from an earlier blast, opening into the back alleys beyond the market. They pushed through, stumbling into the cooler night air. For a moment, Roshan thought they'd made it. Then a blaster bolt seared the ground inches from his feet. He turned to see the parchment-skinned guard from before, his face twisted with rage, weapon leveled at Mishi. "You should have stayed in your cage!" the guard snarled. Roshan stepped in front of her. "And you should have kept your mouth shut." The guard fired, but Mishi moved faster. Her hands touched the air between them, and something invisible rippled outward. The bolt bent mid-flight, streaking harmlessly into the wall. The guard froze, eyes wide in sudden fear. "You—" Mishi's second ripple hit him like a wall. He slammed back into the burning market, swallowed by the chaos. Roshan stared at her, chest heaving. "You could have done that any time." Her voice was tight. "Not without killing myself." The collar blocked it. Before he could answer, a fresh explosion rocked the market behind them. Mishi grabbed his arm. "We're out of time! Move!" They vanished into the shadows of the city's underbelly, the flames of the market painting the night sky behind them. The city's underbelly was a maze of crumbling tunnels, old utility lines, and forgotten service corridors that reeked of stagnant water. Somewhere far above, the chaos of the market still raged. Shouts, sirens, the dull echo of explosions filtering down like the distant growl of a storm. Roshan kept his steps light despite the weight in his legs. Every shadow felt alive, every echo a warning. Mishi moved ahead of him, her stride purposeful, silver eyes scanning every junction before they crossed. "We can't stay underground forever," Roshan said quietly. "We won't," Mishi replied. "But right now, it's the only way to avoid the scanners. The surface will be locked down until the slavers clean up what's left." They pushed deeper into the labyrinth, the air growing cooler. Faint shafts of light filtered through cracks in the ceiling, revealing streaks of rust and graffiti in alien script. The ground sloped downward until the walls widened into what looked like an abandoned maintenance hub. Mishi stopped, turning to him. "We wait here." Roshan frowned. "Wait for what?" Her gaze shifted upward toward a narrow grate where pale red light seeped through. The blood moon. When it's at its highest, the city's surveillance net is weakest. The mineral dust in the atmosphere interferes with their tracking systems. That's our window to move topside. Roshan followed her gaze. Through the grate, the sky was tinged crimson, the full moon painted in deep, eerie red. "How long until it's high enough?" "Not long," she said, though her voice carried a weight he didn't miss. They sat in the quiet for a few moments, the distant sounds of the city humming around them. Roshan studied her in the dim light, the way her hands never fully stilled, fingers curling and uncurling as if bracing for something unseen. "You're not telling me everything," he said finally. Her eyes met his, steady but unreadable. "You wouldn't believe me." "Try me." She hesitated, then took a slow breath. "I told you my people can interface with alien tech. What I didn't tell you is my neural pattern can also control it. Systems, weapons, ships, it doesn't matter. I can make them do things their makers never intended. That's why they want me alive. That's why they'll never stop hunting me." Roshan leaned forward. "So you could, take control of one of their ships? Fly us out of here?" "Yes," she admitted. "But every time I connect, it burns through me. My nervous system can only take so much before... She didn't finish the sentence, but the silence was enough. He stared at her, weighing the truth in her words. Then we make it count. One connection. One chance. Before she could reply, a faint metallic scrape echoed from one of the side tunnels. Roshan's hand went to the small blaster he'd taken from the guard. Mishi moved closer to the wall, her eyes narrowing. The scrape came again, followed by the low, deliberate footsteps of more than one person. Shadows emerged from the tunnel. 3 figures, tall and lean, their armor patched with scavenged plating. Their faces were hidden behind cracked visors, but the red glow of their optics marked them for what they were, bounty hunters. The one in front tilted his head. 2 fugitives in the lower tunnel is easy payday. Roshan raised the blaster. Keep talking, makes it easier to aim. The lead hunter chuckled. You won't fire. We're worth more alive to you than dead. You're worth nothing to me, Roshan said, and fired. The bolt grazed the lead hunter's shoulder, sending him stumbling. The others rushed forward. The fight was fast and brutal. Roshan ducked under a swinging blade, firing point blank into the chest plate of the second hunter. Sparks flew, but the armor held. Mishi stepped in, her hands flashing out, not to strike, but to press against the hunter's helmet. Her eyes glowed faintly. The hunter froze mid-swing, his visor flickering before going dark. He collapsed to the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. The last hunter lunged at her from behind, but Roshan intercepted him, driving the butt of the blaster into the man's visor. The glass cracked and Roshan shoved him into the wall. The bounty hunter slid to the floor, unmoving. Mishi straightened, her breathing sharp. We need to move now. The fight will have triggered a response. They reached the grate where the blood moon's light spilled down. Mishi pulled a compact tool from her belt, a makeshift cutter she'd scavenged earlier, and sliced through the metal bars. Above them, the city was bathed in red. Sirens wailed in the distance, but the streets immediately around them were empty, shadows stretching long under the strange glow. This way, she said, leading him into a narrow alley. The blood moon won't last. We have to reach the shuttle bay before it passes, or we're trapped here. Roshan followed without hesitation. Whatever waited ahead, guards, hunters, the entire slaver fleet, it didn't matter. The night sky above the hills was bruised purple and deep crimson, the moon hanging low and fat like a drop of blood about to fall. The jungle swayed with the restless wind, carrying the scent of smoke, fear, and iron. Roshan half-dragged, half-carried Mishi up the narrow slope, his lungs burning with every step. Behind them, the alien city's market was chaos. Screams, alarms, the distant boom of collapsing stalls. Mishi's breath came in short, ragged gasps. Her legs trembled under her, but she refused to stop. Just a little more, she whispered, though her voice was nothing more than a shiver in the wind. When they finally reached the crest of the hill, Roshan lowered her gently against a jagged boulder. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands trembling, not from weakness, but from the realization that they had actually made it out alive. For now. In the valley below, faint lights moved. Search parties, no doubt. Alien silhouettes gliding with predatory grace, their strange eyes scanning the darkness. Roshan knew they didn't have long. Mishi looked at him then, her gaze searching his face as if committing every detail to memory. You could leave me here, she said quietly. They'll want me, not you. You can vanish into the forest, start over. Stop. His voice was sharp, almost breaking. I didn't go through hell to leave you behind now. Her lips curled in the faintest smile, but her eyes shimmered with something heavier than tears. Then you're a fool. Maybe, he said, leaning closer. But I'm a fool who keeps his promises. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind hissing through the trees. Then Mishi's hand, trembling but steady and intent, reached for his. He felt her cold fingers, the alien texture of her skin. And yet, it felt right. Below them, the shouts grew louder. Roshan could see torchlight now, swaying closer, the hunters weaving through the forest with a speed that made his stomach tighten. They had minutes at most. I'm not going back, she whispered. Not to chains, not to them. If it comes to it, you'll make sure they never take me alive? His jaw locked. He had no answer that didn't taste like poison, but she seemed to read it in his eyes anyway and nodded as if satisfied. They stood together, the blood moon casting their shadows long and warped across the hilltop. Mishi turned to him one last time. Then here's mine, she said softly. If I live, I stay by your side. If I die, I'll haunt anyone who tries to hurt you. And then, just before the hunters broke through the tree line, Roshan pulled her into him, holding her as if the world itself could shatter and it wouldn't matter. For a fleeting second, they weren't prey and predator, fugitive and captive. They were just two souls clinging to the only truth that mattered. They had found each other, and they were not letting go. Roshan took her hand and ran, into the black jungle, into whatever came next, into the promise neither of them intended to break.